Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to discussing the work of writer director J.J. Abrams. I'm your host, as usual. My name is Marcelo Inostroza, and I'd like to welcome you to our continued review series for Duster, Season 1, Episode 7, entitled K129. Uh, Matt, I have the most rarest ice cream that was discontinued years ago. Would you like some?
Yeah, as long as I can get 4 scoops and have to put my feet into tissue boxes, then I guess I'm all good.
Yeah, this episode really addressed a lot of the mystery box element of the show. We finally uh, um, um, got a bigger picture of how the CIA and Saxton are potentially involved by having some kind of pyramid scheme with the with the number stations, which I thought was really interesting. The Howard Hughes aspect of the show rounded out. I was really happy to see that. I was really happy to see that. But the one thing that I was really excited for, and this was mostly for you, Matt, because you hinted at this, the fucking perv detective that was going to rat out Jim to Saxon came back in a big way.
Yeah, so like we had that groom's thread dangling, and of course, as Cheddar Bob does his investigating all episode, we do see, the episode kind of starts with this weird dream psychedelic shit as Grooms wakes up in the hospital bed and is like, Sax, get me Ezra Saxton. I gotta tell him something. And then as Cheddar Bob investigates, where Nina came from, how Jim's dad met Nina, and Jim's dad and his wife get like a nice scene where they do like this kind of improv riffing and prove their story, and I liked all that. And then finally where Cheddar Bob visits Grooms and he's like, "It's Jim. He was talking to this black FBI agent." And we're like, "Oh shit." Now that's going to go down obviously in the finale because this guy has been like a dog with a bone ever since he met Nina and hasn't been able to let it go. And then by the end of the episode, he's kind of got them dead to rights because of Groom. But the main through line of this episode is that like the big deal with the briefcase is going to be going down in Vegas. Um, and as you already alluded to, we do get like a number station, which is like some of the lostiest shit this
As
show has
well.
ever done.
Yep. Uh-huh.
And we also get Howard Hughes, who was mentioned in the past, right? For the car that was meant for Howard Hughes. But in this episode, we have an actor playing Howard Hughes. And I gotta say, as much as Howard Hughes is kind of like a larger than life eccentric, and if you've seen The Aviator, you've seen DiCaprio pissing into bottles and like whatever. It For me, that was a moment in the episode that felt so not of a piece with everything else going on that like it was really jarring to me. And I don't know if it's just the way Hughes was written or the way that the actor portrayed him. It doesn't happen until, the last 20 minutes of the episode, but like it kind of derailed a lot of this major plot for me because that performance was so broad and like it felt like Will Ferrell pretending to be Howard Hughes rather than like an actual performance, if that makes any sense. And again, we can analyze more of this in detail. The fact that the briefcase was like the Watergate tapes, I'm like, I was a little bit surprised. Like, it makes sense with everything they've set up. But if you had told me that this was going to be like a Nixon Watergate conspiracy show, I would have said, hard pass. I have no fucking interest in watching this.
Yeah. First of all, I'm so glad that you brought up that point about how Howard Hughes was portrayed in this show. I thought that he was a little bit over the top. He didn't quite fit with the rest of the episode. to your point, and I do think that it was an actor's choice. I don't think it was necessarily written on the page. I mentioned last week to you that, or I indicated to you that, what do you think is in that MacGuffin briefcase that Saxon and his crew stole from the Russian guys, if I remember correctly? And you basically indicated that was never going to be explained. So to find out that that tape was Nixon complaining about the Watergate scandal, I thought it was an interesting technique because, like Matt said, it it had been mentioned before, but I think that the show ultimately has too many story threads to tie up here with not enough time left. And I I I really wish that they would have pared it down a lot more, specifically with what um, our friend Howard Hughes says to Jim um, before he leaves Vegas with Saxton and somebody else, which I was eh, about.
Right. Well, part of my complaints last week were that Sax watches the news broadcast and sees Luna and Izzy on TV and doesn't know that they have connections to Jim. And so this week, obviously, Jim goes right over to Izzy's and is like, back the fuck off. Saxton is pissed. He's going to come after you. And he's trying to tell her, like, if you don't stop, you're going to get killed. And she's like, oh, did he send you over to do his dirty work? And he's like, no, no, no. He doesn't know I know you. He doesn't know I'm here. And as all this is going on, Luna hides in the trunk of the Duster. And so Luna goes on this trip that obviously she shouldn't be there. And then when Sax meets her, and then she says, like, yeah, me and my mom were on TV because my mom's protesting. And he puts the dots together. At least now we think, okay, Izzy's not going to get flat out murdered because now Sax knows they have a connection to Jim. He'll at least try and go through Jim. That diffused a little bit of that tension. But then it also felt like kind of a convenient moment that, and a little too cutesy, that like Luna hides in the trunk after getting in trouble for, like, you know, she set the fires and is this fire starter, fight fire with fire. She takes things too literally, hides in the trunk, and then that takes the heat off of that storyline a little bit because now her and Sax have had interaction. Um, how did you feel that played? Did it feel natural from what we know of Luna and her? You know, she's a little bit of a plucky, spunky kind of kid. Um, but it also kind of felt like, you know, the 80s movies where a kid tags along, and I'm kind of rolling my eyes a little bit.
Yeah, and listen, it did feel natural for Luna's character because she is a spunky 80s quirky kid, but her storyline, I thought by this time would have been complete. And by complete, I mean one thing. I want Jim to basically tell Luna, or for Luna to find out that Uncle Jim is actually her father. At this point, I don't think it's going to happen because some crazy some Matt story conveniences are going to have to happen for that to come through. But I generally don't blame. I generally I, uh, I generally don't blame the writers trying to do that. I mean, they had a piece on the board and they just had to use it in a really interesting and intriguing way. And plus, Luna being there makes it more dangerous for Jim if he gets caught by Sax or Billy, who's trying to actually find out if Jim is on the if Jim is in fact on the same level, you know?
Yeah, I would just push back on it being like the interesting choice to do with that piece. I would just be like,
Right.
no, it was like kind of the lazy, convenient, let's take the shortest route, even if it's completely illogical to, you know, the way that we've kind of been telling part of this story. And
Mhm.
I don't want to sound too down because this was an entertaining episode, but like it is starting to really
Wither.
get out there in like the revisionist history, alternate timeline kind of shit we kind of got to either go with or not.
Mhm.
And that is a little bit against what I said after episode 2, where I'm like, I like that Jim is kind of like Forrest Gump and interacting with like Elvis and all these things. But for it to be such a well-known, Nixon, the the recordings, Howard Hughes kind of shit, I'm just like, I don't know. It's not my favorite thing that they've done, and it feels like we got to double down on all this to wrap up the season, and I don't necessarily love that. Um, Obviously, Royce and Genesis were like benched this entire episode, so it's just Sax that we're dealing with for the most part. Um, him and Jim, and then when Howard Hughes tells Jim Joey was a K-129, he was working for the CIA and the CIA fucked him over. Uh, it is kind of what we maybe thought had happened, that if it wasn't Saxton who found out that Joey was an informant, then it was the CIA who like just realized they had to get rid of this guy that they were using. Um, so I'm intrigued by that. I'm still annoyed at Nina Nina getting, at the end she gets chloroformed and it's like, "Oh great." And then like earlier her FBI antagonist guy is like still poking around and being a bit of a shit disturber, and I just want that storyline to come to an end because I hate that guy. And like Nina has been shown to be a better agent than like she's kind of being now, where she's investigating, but it's a little sloppy. Her and Awan almost getting a big shootout. Like there's a lot of stuff that happens that should be more fun and more interesting, but I feel like some of these choices are not, I hate to like, judge a show for what it isn't, but we've been having like a lot of fun, and now we're just kind of trying to wrap up so many of these loose ends that we put on the board, that I feel like they're like, "Oh, well, we have to explain why Breen was going crazy and who was giving him the LSD. So we got to have them investigate this and then find all of these pills." And I'm like, we actually don't need half of that shit. Like, we, I obviously appreciate show don't tell, but half the time, if you just told us, "Oh, Breen was being drugged with LSD," okay, great. Who gives a shit who was doing it or why?
Yeah,
It's not the important part of this show. Nina getting her emotional revenge on Saxton for her father
that's the
is the
point.
important part. So I got a little bogged down in like, we're just going through the motions to check things off, and I wanted a little bit more of the heart that this show has shown before.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the heart that the show has shown before, to sort of circle back to the many plot contrivances that this episode does, because it tries to tie up, loose ends. What did you think about Sax and Billy and and everybody in his crew sitting down for breakfast before heading out to heading out to Vegas? What did you think of what did you think of all that stuff?
Well, so that was like, in episode 1, we see the whole family sitting down to like a big meal after Royce gets his new heart that Jim delivered. So I
Right.
do like that, like, we still need to know that this crime crew is a family, and they still, even though they're doing crime, we need to know that like they value loyalty, they value each other and all that kind of stuff. So that's what that scene just kind of reinforces, right? And how big a betrayal it will be if Sax finds out, and if Jim finds out what Sax is really up to, which is probably also going to feel like a betrayal by the end of the day.
Yeah, listen, I loved all the family dynamics with Sax and his crew. You mentioned that if the writers, striked half of the plot contrivances and everything with the CIA and Jim's younger brother eventually being taken care of the CIA. The family stuff really, really, really felt like a a JJ calling card, and it really, really felt um, it really felt of a piece with the type of family dynamics that JJ likes to do. With that being said, I do agree with you that this episode in particular feels like the writers are trying to untangle all of the story threads that they introduced in the earlier episodes. That's why I was really, really concerned with the way that the earlier episodes were constructed, because I believe if they would have untangled some of those story plots earlier on, maybe this would have been better received by those people who are watching it. With that being said, I also think that it's too much with with Jim's younger brother being involved with the CIA. It should have been a smaller story. It should have been Jim trying to figure out if Saxton killed his brother, and Nina trying to figure out if Saxton was responsible for 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 murder and mayhem. It should have been more simple, but I don't think it would have been a Bad Robot show, and I don't think it would have been the type of show that you and I gravitate towards if it wasn't, mystery box here and there, and plot twists and all that stuff.
Yeah, they have to do some of that for the intrigue and the hallmarks of it being a show co-created by J.J. Abrams,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
I just feel that now that we have seen all but one episode of the season, it does feel like there were things early on that maybe we didn't need, that felt like we're overstuffing, mystery box and like intrigue, that we're not going to be able to pay off in a satisfying way, and that we're not going to push to a season 2 because there might not be a season 2.
No.
And also we didn't ever get that invested in those ideas that, like, even if they kind of just drop them, we aren't going to be too concerned about it. um so I'm really mixed, because this was the first episode, like I said, when Howard Hughes comes in, and it just feels kind of so goofy. Like, this show is fun and light, and I do like when it is goofy, because one of my favorite things is where they're driving and A1's got the big antenna out the window of the car and they're trying to pick up, like, that's goofy, but like in a good way. And that would have been how they had to do it. But some stuff, it was almost like a scene. I don't know if you ever saw the MTV Movie Awards where Will Ferrell played the architect from The Matrix, and I'm like, that's what it felt like. It felt like
Yeah.
the scene with like all the exposition and stuff felt like the architect from The Matrix, and Will Ferrell playing him in the parody of it. And
Mhm.
then this guy's there with this horrendous wig and beard that obviously, I know Howard Hughes did look like that, and he was so eccentric that like maybe it lines up, but it just was at such a weird spot in the episode, because everything had literally been ramping up, that here we're finally going to get all of these answers. And like, I'm so distracted by the choice of who is giving us the answers that it like fucks with the flow of the show for me. I did
Yeah.
like, as you say, he's like, oh, I'm glad Luna's here, and I've got the banana walnut ice cream from Baskin Robbins that's been discontinued, and tell me what movie you want to watch, and I'll call up the TV station that I own and I'll get them to play it right now. And of course, when you hear J.J. Abrams is doing a period piece called Duster, and it's about a getaway driver, the first thing you think is Steve McQueen in Bullet, and that's the movie that Luna wants to watch, is Bullet. So like, I'm surprised it took us 7 episodes to get the direct Bullet reference, but like, you knew it had to be coming at some point. Um, so like, part of this episode was really intriguing and really worked, and I like most of the stuff with Sax and Jim really is setting us up for like when all the truth really comes out. It's going to be a reckoning between those two, because They do care for each other, but there's a lot of shit the other one doesn't know about what the other one's been doing. And I can't wait for that to be revealed. I just hope that this kind of like Scooby Doo cartoonish nature of this Howard Hughes scene doesn't carry over very much into the finale.
Yeah, look, I'm on the same wavelength with you. I'm really, really interested to see the final confrontation between Saxon and Jim and Nina. I am not so concerned with the bigger plot having to do with the CIA and and all the rigmaroles of that storyline. I just want to see I just want to see Jim get his revenge, and I want to see Nina get what she deserves as well. Like, like I said, and like both of us have intimated, the story seems to have been a little bit too crowded. But like Matt said, it's a JJ show. Um, if you didn't, if we watched a JJ show that was simple and straightforward, we'd be like, this is a little weird. This doesn't seem like a JJ show. So I think if I can speak for you, Matt, it was all about the execution of of uh of this episode.
Kind of. It is really weird because this is a show that has so much going on and does have like a lot of stuff that is kind of boundary pushing and like a little bit bold, but then also at every chance that it could be more edgy or bolder in its storytelling choices, half the time it makes the safest, most familiar choice possible. That even when it's doing so much that you're like, this should feel fresh and fun, but then it just feels a little bit safe and familiar. And I just keep thinking, like, if they every time they make like a bold choice, I'm like, yeah, that's great. And this was maybe one of the bold choices that just didn't work. Um, but I gotta respect the swing, especially because so many other times they've taken such a safe, easy, like network TV choice that I've just been getting a little frustrated. But the main reason you watch the show is to hang out with the characters, and we still do really like Jim and Nina, and obviously Josh Holloway and Rachel Hilson are so compelling, and Keith David as Sax is such a good bad guy, even if he might not be as bad as we think, or he might be worse than we think. At this point, who's to say? It's it's one of the like weirdest responses I've felt to a show at this point, because in the first four episodes I would have said like completely on board, loving it, and now like five, six, seven, they've been doing a lot of stuff, and like 70% of it is really working, but that 30% that's not is really hitting me harder than I would have wanted it to.
The 30% is gnawing in your craw. If that's
Yeah.
if I can be so bold, yeah, guys. Well, I listen. I have really, really, really enjoyed the ride of Duster, but I think that my love of the show comes from hanging out with Jim, hanging out with Nina, and hanging out with Sax and his crew. And I think the emotional through line of that storyline is what carries me through. Listen, it's not the best Bad Robot show ever. I think that those days are behind Bad Robot. Um, but I, I do appreciate the effort by JJ and Latoya Morgan, and I hope that when they write the episode next week, I'm assuming that they're going to do that. They can focus on the parts of the storyline that I actually like and sort of not jettison, but leave aside the political machinations of of um of the other story threads that I don't think they saw. I don't think they um tied up in a. I don't think they tied up in a satisfying way. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and as you said, this is the first Bad Robot show we've gotten in like a long time that feels like a bad robot show. And as negative as I am on this episode, still, this is probably like the best thing we've gotten from them in a decade that feels like a bad robot show, right? Because
Yeah.
obviously, like, this first season of Presumed Innocent was incredible, but it doesn't feel like a bad robot show. It feels like a David E. Kelly joint that Bad Robot just helped facilitate. Um, so like in terms of TV shows that they've done, this is for the most part like one of their better ones lately. So like I don't want people to think like I'm totally down on it, and I'm completely open to the finale winning me over and making me like reassess what I've felt like has been safe bad choices or waste of time moments, because they could reframe some of those moments depending on what happens in the finale, right? And that is something that bad robot shows have done in the past, where you feel like you're watching something that's inconsequential, and then you get a key piece of information, 4 or 5 episodes later, that reframes a lot of what you were watching. And I don't necessarily think there is going to be like a storytelling technique like that up their sleeve, but I won't rule it out. And, if they do give us something, then I'll have to give the props that it deserves. And I do hope that, according to IMDb or whatever, I think that JJ and Latoya wrote the finale. And like, I really just hope that they did, because they wrote the first few together. And then I think the last 4 episodes have been different writers, and they let the like writers room take a crack at them, and they've been the ones that I've had like the most issues with. And it's just like, I know everybody's busy and the showrunners and everybody have to do certain things, but sometimes you just want those main creatives to Taylor Sheridan that shit and just make sure that everything feels of a piece. And I know that that's not how JJ operates, right? Like, he wants it to still feel like the show, but I don't think he would go in and rewrite entire episodes and slap his name on them, to make sure that it felt like his voice, right? Which is something that other people with Jack Shacks in Montana certainly
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, no, I look, I don't wanna, um, JJ is not Tyler Sheridan. Tyler Sheridan, um, is he's a very, very good writer, but he's a writer who has a singular vision and who doesn't trust anybody else. JJ comes from the old school, TV model, right? Where he trusts his team, so he most likely is gonna get a project started, and then, like his idol, pass it on to qualified people to bring the story home. That being said, I wouldn't say no to a Bad Robot TV series one day being completely written by J.J. Abrams, which is never going to happen. Um,
Well, and then you might not end up getting like storylines about long lost sisters and vampires in like spy shows where you're like, what in the fuck
yeah,
happened to Alias because he
yeah,
turned over the reins, right? Like,
yeah, he
there are
did.
certain shows where you're just like, I know the guy
What?
wanted to do other shit, but like, you let your baby get savaged by people that you thought you trusted, and it's happened more than once.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It definitely has. So, like I said, I'm really, really hopeful for the final episode of season one. I'm gonna still hold out hope, but I'm just hoping that it delivers on the points that I want, and I hope that it doesn't make you too distressed, Matt.
I hope that it will deliver in some sort of way that I'll be happy we have watched this show, and if it's all we get, then I'll be content.
All right, guys. So on that positive, good note, if you guys like what we do here on the show, you can email us. We have an email. It's radio815 at AOL.com. You can find us pretty much anywhere on the web by searching Radio 815. We have a YouTube channel. We have a YouTube page. We have a Discord. We have a whole bunch of shit, um, where you can find us. If you want to, for some reason, talk to me about JJ Abrams and the show, or anything else at all, you can find me on Twitter, formerly known as X. I'm at Creek Fanatic 88. But guys, If you want to try and find Matt, that's a little bit harder to do, but I'm gonna kick it over to him anyways.
We can lock some movies on letterboxd.com. My username is MDC3000, so we can see what we're rating, reviewing, and you can go, oh my God, why did this guy like Megan 2.0 so much? And I'll just say, I don't know. Sometimes when you double down on a sequel and go bigger, it is better.
All right, guys. So, with all that being said, thank you so much for listening. But until next time, as always, we'll talk back soon.